One of the most well-rounded and new player-friendly archetypes in Rogue Trader is the Warrior. This is an incredibly powerful and straightforward versatile character that can be built in many ways depending on the tier 2 you can go for. If you build a Navy Officer origin, then this is the only way that you can do a hybrid attacker, which is using both melee and range, and it does work best on a Warrior because it's the only one that can survive in the close ranges that you need to be able to use a pistol like that. When it comes to the primary features of this, your two main abilities are Charge and Endure. Charge comes in at level 1. What this does is it allows you to dash in a straight line and to get off a melee attack. There are talent upgrades, so this does not cost MP, and there are ways that you can extend the range and you can increase the damage you do on this based on your stats. There are very good items that support this. In Act 1, you'll have an item that reduces it from a 2 AP cost down to a 1 AP cost. In Act 2, there is an item, a sword, that when you kill a charge, it refreshes charge, so you can make multiple charges a turn. And in Act 4, there's an incredibly overpowered item that on melee kill, you get a 0 AP charge, which is ideal for Warrior. Warrior can be very easily built using Rock Swords, which is the most overpowered two-handed weapon in the game, or you can even use it for Slash to increase your attack economy, but that's going to be more for an agility-based build. At level 3, you gain the Endure ability. Until the Warrior's next turn, they gain Toughness bonus divided by 2 Deflection, and 10 plus the character's level divided by 6 temporary wounds. Early game, Deflection is really good, however it rapidly drops off in the late game because it doesn't scale very well. What Deflection does is it is straight damage reduction. If you have 5 Deflection, you take 5 less damage. However, Armor will actually reduce all damage by your armor percentage. So if you have at the cap 90% armor reduction, that will reduce all damage by 90%. It does, however, also reduce the effectiveness of your Deflection. If you had 10 Deflection in that damage calculation, you'd only actually have 1 deflection from that 90% armor because it would remove 90% of your deflection, because unfortunately deflection happens in the calculation before armor. So if you were to take 200 damage, you had 10 deflection, that would drop it down to 190, and then you'd have the 90% damage reduction, so it'd only do 10% of that. So yeah, you'd actually still be taking 19 damage there, so your deflection only actually had 1 impact on that. So whilst it is super effective in the early game, it does drop off a little bit in the late game. The level 4 ability Daring Breach is your heroic action, and it is one of the most game-breaking and overpowered abilities in the game. The Warrior immediately restores all AP and MP and gains agility bonus MP until the end of the turn. They do not lose NP after performing attacks. The Warrior has no limit on melee attacks this turn. There is a limit, it is 12. However, this is basically a full second turn and you can make as many attacks as you have AP, which makes certain exemplar talents like Eve of Battle incredibly overpowered. You can also combine this with Finest Hour, so you can get 2 essentially free turns with unlimited AP and MP as long as you're getting kills. This allows Warriors to be the most effective battlefield clearing and boss clearing archetype in the game. Your primary stats are going to be Strength and Toughness for most builds, with some of them going into Agility, so most likely you're going to build for Athletics and Carouse, though there aren't actually that many Carouse checks. So if you wanted to potentially, depending on your origin, go into Coercion, if you were an Arbitress or a Commissar, this is something you can do, but you will be wanting to look to take base and advanced skills because you're not going to be leveling Fellowship, but there is over 63 Fellowship you can get on run, so it's not too bad. If you do go for Executioner, you're going to want to go into Medicae, and again, there's a lot of items to support Medicae. Demolitions is an option, but you have a lot of agility-based characters that you build up from companions, so chances are you're not really going to want to cover demolitions. Warrior has access to a lot of talents that can allow you to build in different ways. Though with the Rogue Trader system, the game is tailored towards one-turn hyper-offensive and destroying all enemies before they can act. The way that defense works in this game, and because enemies have such large numbers and swarms, making the playing field unbalanced, you will either find that your defenses are too little to stop yourself from getting instantly swarmed to death, or so great it doesn't matter how many enemies there are, they can't damage you anyway. So it does make building a defensive character kind of awkward, because it either does nothing or it stops everything. There's also the problem with initiative, that due to having low agility and perception and the fact that the game uses initiative blocking, if anyone in your party has higher agility than you, chances are they're going to force you to go last in the queue after all the enemies. So as a tanking character, you you won't have time to set up your defensive abilities or your taunts because they're not really passive. So if you do want to survive, you are going to need to rely on passives. There are some very good ones for surviving, something like defensive stance, which is if the warrior has not attacked this turn, they gain 20% armor. This does actually scale with your toughness and it is exceptionally powerful. 20% armor is a straight up 20% damage reduction. There are abilities that say that you mitigate damage, and there are some on some tier 2s like Vanguard that says that you take 50% less damage. However, these are noob traps. They don't actually reduce damage by 50%. They reduce enemy modifiers by 0.5. So if an enemy has a 3 times damage modifier, they'll actually have a 2.5 times instead of a 3 times if it says that you reduce enemy damage by 50%. It is very misleading the way that the UI works. Some other really good ones is Thick Skin. This is one that I like to take for the Chaos Spawn in the tutorial. The warrior gains 1 damage deflection, which useful early game, not so useful late game, but their parry chance increasing by 25% of the warrior's total armor is something that is very effective and can be combined very well with other talents. Though this is more useful for an ally that starts with heavy armor. If you don't have that, you can always take the common talent for Duelist, which is Dueling Mastery, which will give you 15% bonus parry. So this will do more but doesn't scale, but if you do build for heavier armor, then obviously Thick Skin will do a lot more. Some talents that I used to put a lot of effort into was something like Hardened Scars, but this was before I realized just how little deflection really does in the game. The idea of this was every time you took damage, your deflection would increase, so I used to put a lot of value into it, but on further testing, I found out it actually did very little. Other talents like Clenched Teeth, again, it might seem like it does a lot because you get given toughness bonus deflection against the first attack made by every enemy this combat, but once again, this is not really doing that much. Early game, if you're taking 20 damage, taking off 5 is really good. Late game, taking off 5 damage from 100, not really going to do much. Like I said, it rapidly drops off. And other abilities like Disarm, again, on paper seem really good because you get to stack armor from your toughness, but it requires you to attack enemies. Anything that requires you to attack enemies to gain your defenses is probably not going to work for a defensive character, because it means that they have to have already been attacked by the enemy, they then have to be in a position to attack the enemy, they have to try not to kill the enemy, which a warrior is very effective at killing, so it becomes less valuable. They also have talents around getting temporary wounds, but however, warriors cannot stack temporary wounds beyond one source. Whatever is the highest source will likely go with that. There is a tier 2 Vanguard that can stack all sources of temporary wounds. However, this is a very inferior tier 2 compared to something like Arc Militant. And what Arc Militant can do is it can use items like Invigorating Resolve, which are incredibly overpowered to generate insane temporary HP from killing. So the more killing power you have, actually the more defenses you have, which is why Arc Militant massively outscales Vanguard in terms of defensive and offensive capabilities, but that will be saved for when we cover tier 2s. Some deceptively really overpowered talents that they have access to is something like Crowd Kill. Area attacks will actually scale damage from strength. Now, on the surface, you might be thinking, well, if I get 2 enemies in there, getting 2 sources of strength damage to each of that enemy that's in the area of Crowd Kill seems really good, but this will also apply to guns. So if you're using a shotgun or a faux hammer, which is the pistol shotguns, you'll actually scale damage for every enemy in the area. More importantly, if an enemy is a larger enemy, so it has, say, 4 cells that it covers, if all 4 cells are in your area of attack, you'll actually get 4 times the scaling rather than just for one enemy. So this is something that's exceptionally good. Other talents that are exceptionally good is stuff like Easy Target. The warrior's critical damage is also increased by your strength bonus with enemies not armed with a melee weapon. This will again also apply to guns, not just melee. Unfortunately, talents like Desolation used to be incredibly powerful for scaling agility damage. However, it did get reworked to have only for melee attacks, not for all attacks. Previously, Warrior used to actually be more effective at dealing damage than, say, a soldier did with guns, but the slight changes to Desolation did change that up. As I said, Charge has some really good boosting abilities like Impetus, which is demonstrated by Charge is increased by toughness bonus plus strength bonus when this ability is used at a distance of more than 5 cells. This is very good for charge looping. You can also use something like Ramming Speed to increase your cells that you can use by 3, which makes it very easy to follow up. You also have Rigorous Training, which is basically there are 2 parts of it. You don't use MP when you use Slash or Charge, which is the main one. You do get some dodge bonuses based on your agility, but if you're in heavy armor, you're not really going to see much of that. Other things that can be useful, something like Opening Strike. Charge and push increases damage of ranged attacks made against the effective enemies by 9% until the end of combat. This is something that's more useful for, like I said, a Navy officer that is offhanding a foe hammer, because with Fleet Combat Training, which is a unique origin talent, when you make a melee critical or you parry, you make an offhand attack. Whilst it is stronger to have double melee, people like the offhand pistol gimmick, so it is something you can use. And there is a talent like Open Engagement. When there are no enemies adjacent to the warrior at the start of the turn, the warrior's damage is increased by 2x strength bonus for 1 melee attack. Unfortunately, this is only 1 melee attack, but it can be very useful, but it is less of a priority. So some of the abilities that you can pick up on warrior is something like Reckless Strike, which will increase your melee attack damage and your armor penetration, and it will also ignore part of your enemy's parry. So this is very good at getting through enemies. However, it will give them a counter attack if they survive. Sworn Enemy, the warrior marks a target gaining 24% armor and 6% damage on melee attacks against that target, so it's very good for a 1v1 style duel, though there aren't many encounters where you have exceptionally strong enemies where you use this. It's mostly going to be used for bosses. Breakthrough will allow you to gain the slash ability. The warrior dashes through an enemy to the cell on the opposite side and makes a melee attack with minus 50% reduced damage. Can be applied only once for targeting per round. It can be very difficult to use this if there are enemies on the other side, and you get a number of charges equal to your agility bonus. So this is going to be better for a high agility character, but you can use something like Shearing Strikes that you can make multiple attacks with this, so you can actually use it and then pop through enemies and have multiple attacks with it. Next up is Forceful Strike. The warrior gathers all their might for a crushing strike. Their next melee attack pushes an enemy away. The distance of the push is equal to strength bonus. This ability cannot be used with a heavy rock saw. That had to be fixed for that reason. This will give you pushback, and it will deal damage to enemies as they travel. You can see this on the in-game wiki to see exactly how push works. Last one is Taunting Scream. What Taunting Scream does is the warrior unleashes a terrifying scream, drawing the attention of their enemies and becoming the priority target for enemies who fail willpower resistance tests for 3 rounds. Looking at homeworlds, ones that are very clearly designed for it is the Navy Officer. Like I said, it has the ability of something called Fleet Combat Training, that when the Navy Officer scores a critical hit or successfully parries an attack with their primary weapon, they immediately make an attack with their secondary weapon. This can be a pistol like a burst-only pistol or a foe hammer, which can get some good scaling from strength, but ideally you will use 2 melee, and 2 melee will be far stronger depending on what build you go for. Ministorum Priest is another really good one because it can be very exceptionally powerful with an Executioner. This is because of Cleansing Faith can build up quite a lot with it. Other options are Crime Lord. While some people like to build Crime Lord for an operative, it's actually a weapon skill perception based origin. Killing Plan will scale extra damage from it, so it is something that will be constantly active, and before the 1.5 rework it was actually one of the more powerful ones. There's also Commissar. Commissar is a range-based one, but if you are using a main hand gun with an offhand sword, you can always charge in, and the iconic sidearm bonuses will actually apply to a foe hammer, though it's not going to be as strong as, say, the Navy Officer variant, but it is something people like because at the end of the day, this is an RP playing game. Sanctioned Psyker will always be the most powerful option for any origin, and Pyromancer is exceptionally strong for a melee build. You can self-immolate yourself with the Ignite ability, you can survive your own damage with the Body of Flames talent, and then you can stack on Orchestrate Flames, which will add your fire damage to your melee. And who doesn't think a Flaming Sword is really cool? In the DLC of the Arbitrator Origins, the Subductor is a melee-based shield one, which is exceptionally powerful to build up and go for it. If you're interested in any of those builds, I know I didn't explain the Origins in too much detail, but I do have many builds on the channel, and this will be something that you can follow up after this video. Looking at homeworlds, Deathworld is exceptionally strong for it because whilst you have temporary wounds, you will gain extra armor and dodge, so this is something that can be very useful, and it also gives you a cheat death ability as well as some really good talents. Voidborn is one that can be useful because you can re-roll failed characteristic dodge and parry checks, though I don't think the talents are as strong for it, so it isn't really one I would recommend. Hiveworld, as previously mentioned in my officer guide, it can use weapon personalization to slightly enhance yourself, but you're not going to be getting as much of it out on a warrior as you were an officer. Forge World is another really good one. The Force for the Purpose bonus can be used to enhance your armor based on your toughness, or it can be used to enhance your dodge further based on your agility, so it is exceptionally good for a melee character. Imperial World does still exist as a lazy option to give just a +10 anywhere where you're not really sure what you're doing, but the rest of the talents aren't going to be too effective for you, though you can still use something like No Heresy, because most of Act 2 onwards is going to be fighting against Xeno enemies, so these will be bonuses that are always on. Fortress World will also apply here, because Never Stop Shooting doesn't need to be based on range kills, so it is usable by a melee, but I probably would still go either Death World, depending on the build I'm going for, or Forge World, but it's going to be up to you which you want to do, and it will vary build to build. And like I said, do check out some of those build videos if you are more interested in that. As an example, I've got two slightly different warriors built here. With Abelard, what we have built in for is Thick Skin first, which is to get his parry up. This is very useful for getting through the Chaos Spawn. Afterwards, I've taken Rigorous Training, so he can use his charges and still also be able to move and attack if need be, though you could probably swap this out for something else. I've taken Taunt and Scream because he's going to be our main guy that I want to get hit. I've taken Fleet Combat Training, so his crits and parries give him offhand attacks whilst also progressing his weapon skill. Impetus to increase his charge damage because he will be using that quite a bit. The Daring Breach upgrade that I've taken, now there are a couple of options for Daring Breach's upgrades. I always seem to go for 2 and 4. The reason for this is, well, you get 4 MP and you don't spend MP after using attacks or abilities. And the last one is your melee attacks deal additional strength damage. Whilst you can use one to get +10 movement, this one's not really the best on its own because you're going to want to be able to increase movement and not cost it by attacking. And the priority target one for when enemies are hit, that could be more useful going for a tanking one, but if you're using a heroic act, it's probably to push and it's not for defense. Afterwards, I've picked up ramming speed and I've started progressing toughness so you can survive. I've picked up the ability Reckless Strike. I've also taken Gelfme, which is going to be a unique knockdown ability of the Origin that's coming from Navy officers. This is going to be Abelard exclusive. Increasing toughness even further, picking up Carouse for my skills after picking up athletics, and eventually I've gone into dual weapon combat because I'm building Abelard for dual weapons. As a second example, I've built a very different Heinrichs. This one is going to be an agility-based warrior rather than a toughness-based warrior. Heinrichs comes at level 4, so he starts with Rigorous Training, and we can't change this, but this is going to be useful for either charge or slash. Because he's an agility-based character, we do take Desolation, so his melee attacks do gain bonuses. Psycho Staff attacks do count as melee attacks, so they actually gain this bonus as well. We'll be progressing weapon skill. I am actually also progressing Medicaid because I plan to go into an Execution in Tier 2, but the first ability I'm going to pick up is going to be Breakthrough for those extra uses of slash to increase his attack economy. As a Psyker, you take Psycho Minoris to increase his Psi rating, but if you want to know more about that, do watch a specific build guide. Increasing his weapon skill further, also picking up Shearing Strikes, which will give the offhand attack to slash, which is going to be very useful for the sword Veil render. Taking Daring Breach upgrade 2, the same as Abelard, as it is the most powerful one. This one, instead of opting for warrior talents, I've actually taken a psycho talent called Destined here, along with agility increase. For his level 11 ability, I've taken a Psycho Power here, which is Shield of the Emperor, which is going to be very good for party-wide defensive buffs, as well as taking Blade of Light, which again will increase his damage and armor penetration for his 4 swords. We're going to increase agility more. Heinrichs comes with base and advanced skill Lord Xeno, so he can pick this up a little bit, even though he doesn't increase his intelligence. Rank 13, I've taken Hindler's Hatred. This is going to be a Psycho version of Fired Up, so for every critical hit that happens around him, he will increase his critical damage. Lastly, again, a little bit of toughness, just bring it up to 40 to hit that breakpoint, though we're not going to use that too much as his unique tier 2 is going to actually scale his HP and armor off Medicaid, but that'll be more later. And Psycho Majoris just to up his other Psycho powers here. He will also come with Iron Arm and Word of the Emperor being a Psycho, so you'll see how these guys end up playing differently. As I said, this Heinrichs has been built as a dual force sword user that's going to use Shearing Strikes with Breakthrough, whereas Abelard's going to be more of the traditional defensive counter-attacker who's going to be in our front line, which is why he has gear to reduce damage from criticals, and he also has lower charge costs that have been put onto him rather than Heinrichs. He also has access to Relish Anguish, that if he knocks back enemies, he can generate temporary HP, which will come in with this second set. Again, like I said, I'm not going to explain too much about the builds here because that's going to be saved for a actual build video. If you do want to look those up, we do have plenty of them on the channel, but I'm just going to give you a quick little example of how they play as a warrior. If you've liked the videos, remember to like and subscribe, and let's talk about the rotation here. So I have Cassia, who's going to provide some buffs to my warrior. My Abelard is obviously being a Navy officer, so he's going to use Brace for Impact to give out some deflection buffs to the party, and then he's going to use Charge to move up on the enemies. This will put him in the open, which will actually cause the enemies to prioritize him a little bit more. I could use the Endure, I could go for an attack, and because of Abelard's knockdown and Get Off Me, as I explained, this is essentially taken out 3 enemies. Coming around to Heinrichs, again as a warrior, I can use his Psychic powers to set up Blood of the Emperor and then Shield of the Emperor, as well as buff himself up with Iron Arm, which will make him more survivable and get ready to help the party. And then he can even use something like Breakthrough to get through some extra attacks here. Because Heinrichs can also take a Bring It Down, as Abelard acted from Bring It Down himself, I can then also use his Psychic power if I want to hit with AoEs, because warriors don't have the best AoEs until they get a little bit more geared later, but Psychics are just naturally really strong. For Abelard's main turn, I can then single target prioritize another person whilst also distracting others, and then I can taunt people up, and they will survive these counterattacks. Now, this isn't as impressive as what you saw the Blade Dancer do, but Blade Dancer is a DLC class with massive power creep. Warriors get a lot stronger as they get more gear, but their base rotations are going to be very simple. And with all of this set up, when the enemies then do come and start swarming you, as I said that they often do, all these shots are going to do very minimal, if nothing at all, to characters like Abelard and Heinrichs, and then they'll be able to survive and counterattack themselves, which will then allow your other companions to then either set up and clear them, or it will allow the combat to continue where you can build up some heroic actions, where you can actually start seeing some real clearing. This is going to be the advantage of warriors, the fact that they just don't die, they out-survive the enemy, and then that can allow you to go on and start pushing and engaging enemies further, and you can slowly start winning the combat this way. If you found this useful, like I said, do follow along to the channel. We've got some full build guides here, but this was just going to be a very brief little example showing you off what you could do. And as you can see with the stats here, especially with a Psyker, you're just going to have exceptional defenses that enemies are really going to struggle to get through. I've been Revan619, that's all I've got time for today, and I'll see you in the next guide, and do hang around for some more content around Rogue Trader and Dark Heresy coming in the future.